Rawlings, a member of the board of the Milford Historical Society, and we're fortunate to be here today with Richie Peagler, who grew up in New Milford. He moved to New Milford when he was 6 years old, and from Detroit, and he and his family are very prominent. The Peagler family is a very prominent name in New Milford, and he's agreed to be interviewed for our oral histories for our Black experience in the Milford program. And Rich is now 75, even though he looks much younger than that. And he has a very impressive resume. I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but I'll give you a few of the threads. He graduated from the Milford High School in 1964. He excelled as a baseball and basketball player. I got to see him play some of those sports, and he was very good. But more to our point here, Rich served as his class president for 3 years, and including his junior year when he was also the vice president of the school student council. And I can tell you, I was actually in the student council the following year as a freshman. Student council was very active and very prestigious in a way for a student. So the fact he was considered to be one of the top students in his school and well respected is very important. He also was selected to attend prestigious boys state at UConn, that I think the summer between your junior and senior year.
That's correct.
And he graduated in 1968 from Central State University in Ohio with a degree in education, and soon earned his master's in counseling from UConn. He then went on to earn a doctorate in counseling and family practice from Syracuse, setting a direction for the rest of his working career. After stints as a counselor and educator at Western Connecticut State University and Wooster School in Danbury, Rich embarked on a 38-year career as a counselor and director of student support services at Cortland State University in New York State. I hope I'm paraphrasing this properly. Mm-hmm. Along the way, and this is definitely paraphrasing because he's been much honored. He's Dr. Peagler because he has a doctorate, but Richie was much honored by the college and the state for his work, including nurturing multicultural and diversity initiatives, as well as for his service on numerous college and student affairs committees. Rich still lives in Cortland with Vashti, his wife of 45 years. Rich has found time through those many years in Cortland to serve as a local volunteer and leader on behalf of, among others, the aged and those with substance abuse problems. To say that he's made his life's mission to help others would be an understatement. Dr. Peagler, I'll call you that one time. He doesn't like being called Dr. Peagler, but Rich, we're so pleased and honored you've offered to be part of our oral history program, and what you say here will be greatly appreciated, and I'm sure will educate people for many years to come, for those who enjoy our museum. So welcome to the Milford Historical Society.
It is my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go through a few questions here, and they're open-ended. Whatever you want to say to any of them, you're very welcome to, and I hope they strike a chord with you. How might your early childhood experiences in town, especially as a young Black boy, have affected how you perceived New Milford? The authority figures here, police, teachers, people in churches, or any other authority figures, and your fellow school students and friends while you were growing up. That's a mouthful, but you know, what was it like as a child for you, and how did you get influenced in your evolution as a person, being a young Black person in the town without very many Black people?
Well, I think some of it has to do with my history too, and what impact that had. Like you said, I was originally from Detroit. Started school, first grade here, and coming from Detroit to the country was not pleasing to me because I was used to overhead lights on the streets. My parents lived in a tenement building with other people, one bathroom for sometimes 3 or 4 families. And I come to an area where I don't have any street lights. I'm out there in the woods with a mountain behind me. And
Fort
Hill. And then, you know, what was also kind of interesting, and I never knew the history about this, how the Peaglers and the Freemans and Gordy and Nellie Ritchie And there was one other black family.
Deacocks?
No, it wasn't the Eacocks. But we ended up there in that house that my father was brought up with. They had 10 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the house itself is a piece of history for the family. But one of the experiences I think I want to share with you how traumatic this was. Gordy, Richie, and my uncle Owen went to, trying to think of the area now. Well, it was a remote area to cut down a Christmas tree. Okay, on property they probably didn't know. So they left Gordy Ritchie Jr. and myself in the car. And when Owen got out of the car and went to cut the tree, I cried that whole time. I'm looking around at snow. I'm looking around at trees. I mean, it's wilderness. It's not like looking at a brick building, you know, and I was scared to death. And it took, my dad used to ask me yearly, how do you like New Milford? I said, I hate it, you know, and I would be very blunt about that as a kid even. I just didn't like it, being in the country. Now, how did that change? It changed by my uncles.
Sorry, take your time.
My Uncle Bill, my Uncle Fred, guys got me fishing, which I still love to this day. And I fished the Finger Lakes with my son. That was one thing. Then, I mean, that's family and uncles.
Family pulled you through.
Exactly. Owen was my roommate. He was in college at Western. He and I had a bedroom together. I don't know. I asked my mother when he passed away, did you ever see any problems between Owen and myself as a kid? She said, I don't remember a thing, so I guess it must have been fairly good. And
he was, by all accounts, a special guy.
Yeah. And so he put up with me, and then he went off on his own after he graduated from Wisconsin, met Joyce Hancock, and they got married. And so he was a good model. And the funny part of it was, you know, I never realized how good a model was, you know, until I got older. But he taught at Pettibone. He was the only African-American teacher in the Milford. And then he's got this kid from Detroit who likes to get in fights. So I guess it's okay to use the principal's name, right? Or no?
Sure.
Okay, Stanley Satir.
Yep. Who's still alive.
Oh my gosh. Being the smart guy that he was, wouldn't even deal with it. He'd send me down to my uncle. And of course, he was very verbal. And, you know, I had to make up my mind, I had to stop this, you know. But it took a while. And so that aspect of my life as well. And the other thing that was difficult was, and I knew I was black because all my family in Detroit was black. So that whole racial identity component was there very young. I knew who I was. And when I started school here, there was one guy, he was a few grades ahead of me, and I can't remember his name. I wouldn't mention it.
No, sir. Feel free.
But he would call me, you black mole.
Oh, a white kid.
Yeah.
I thought it was a black kid.
No,
okay.
no. Called me a black mole. And I remember going home and talking to my mother about it. And she was saying, well, you know, he's got to be white trash. So when he calls you a black mole again, you call him white trash. And that's exactly what I did. We never got into a fight, you know, but it was kind of even Steven. But those experiences got me grounded. I knew who I was coming from Detroit, but those kinds of things reinforced it. and I knew how it was. And it also helped me to be competitive. You know, whether it's baseball, basketball, or whatever it was, I would try to be the best Black athlete in the community. And there wasn't many of us until Jimmy Carter came, as a matter of fact. So it's those kinds of things, as well as, you know, my uncles getting involved with me at a very, very young age. And of course, when I got to high school, it was like another world. I put all that other stuff behind me and just really started to meet some great people like yourself, Art.
Thank you.
And other kids in my class as well. And then the friendship started to develop, still knowing who I was. And, you know, my class in my sophomore year, I could be his class president. And I can remember being excited about that. Little did I know that it was to bring up all this emotion. But anyhow, I went home excited, and I told my dad, you know, I was like the president of the class. He goes, I don't want you to have your head get big now, because that has stuck with me the rest of my life.
It's good advice.
So, high school, the development of friendships, knowing who I am, and then you asked a very important question. What happens to an adolescent, to a guy like me, who's African American? And it's the same stuff that happened to W.E.B. Du Bois. Great Barrington, Massachusetts is probably smaller than New Milford. We stopped off to see his hometown. But when you started to see the difference is when you'd begun to date or think about dating. You know, what is going to happen when you ask a lady who's Caucasian about a date? And the same happened, but I also, you know, first time I did it, there was a yes, and then a phone call that said no. What will people think? And I really wasn't surprised by it. But I also had the Ritchie family who was next door, who was Black. He had cousins in Danbury, who obviously African American. And I got to meet women, you know, as a part of the adolescent experience, if you will. And so it was those kinds of things that always let me know who I was from the very beginning.
But you were willing to ask a white girl
That's right.
out,
Yep.
which was more than I think a lot of young Black men, boys would have done at that point in their life. So that said something to me about you. Should say something about to you about the fact you were probably a little more mature or whatever at that age, even though you'd had a slow start in New Milford. By that point, you'd evolved to the point where you felt comfortable in town.
Well, the interesting thing was,
you didn't hate New Milford as much at that point.
Oh no, at that point, I was getting grounded. And then, you know, the fact that your class, you know, would vote you 3 years back to back as president of the class and vice president of student council. And, you know, part of that experience too, like I had good academic people like you to hang out with, and no, not so much with you, but Art. But just the kids that I experienced in high school, I didn't care who they were. You know, there was individuals like Dean Shelby, who lived, you know, down
Sunny Valley.
Yeah, Sunny Valley. Those guys hunted. I would take my gun out with the dog. I'd have a basketball game. I'd go hunting pheasants down below in the swamp where Big Y is. and King would put up some pheasants. I'd fire one shot, he'd run home. But I'd get the pheasant. But I would do that kind of stuff. I had a group of friends that did that kind of thing and fished. And I mean, it just provided a lot of different options for me. to continue. I mean, it was just the oddest thing. Then,
so you had a diverse experience
exactly,
as an adolescent into your teen years, and experiencing a lot of things like most people don't have. Most people do either kind of one set of things or another set of things. Sounds like you would, because of your broad spectrum of friends, you actually experienced a lot.
Yeah. And then the kids that were supposedly the guys that back in the day that had their collars up, you know, and that.
I think back in those days they were called hoods.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I didn't want to use the term, but that was
right?
it. That was it. Yeah. So one of the guys that was a hood, we tied in chin-ups. You know, both of us had the school record at that particular point in time.
Oh, the national fitness test stuff, yeah.
So at a dance, I had to go to the men's room. And there this individual was, and he was in there with his guys with the collars, smoking some cigarettes, you know, that kind of thing. He introduced me. This is the man, you know, who tied me in the chin-up competition. And, you know, so, but I enjoyed everyone. Didn't matter who it was. Some of the kids that were farmers and that kind of stuff.
That is a tribute to you, obviously, the fact you were able to get to know and get along with everybody.
Right.
What memory? Now, I want to ask you your memories of being a younger member, the youngest member of your family at that point. If you could spend a minute talking about, you mentioned Owen, and you also had a relative who was famous locally for his military service.
Yes.
Right. And I know that some people still think he should have been honored even more than he was. If you could give a brief background on that and why, when I was introducing you, I was mentioning the Peagler family being so well known, and you know Peagler Hill Road, and in fact your mom still lives at age 93, still lives on Fort Hill. Yeah. If you could give a bit of background to our viewers on them, please.
Well,
what Owen accomplished in his life in addition to teaching at
exactly, Petty Wooster School.
Yeah, helping you out of scrapes. Other than that, he did more than that.
He did. He was deputy director of the Office of Opportunity in New York City, and as a consequence, you know, here's this guy from the country too. You know, and I can remember him talking about at one time in my life I was very naive, you know, about inner city and you know and that kind of stuff. But he grew into that job and knew that, you know, people in New York City and other cities, you know, are just victims of poverty. And a lot of times it has to do with racism, you know, which I'm certainly well aware of, you know, back then. And then he became Dean of Continuing Education at Pace University in New York City, and became another Dean of Continuing Education at Eastern Connecticut State University. So he had that, you know, experience in higher ed as well as dealing with poverty and the kinds of things that causes in the inner city.
He had a federal appointment at one point, didn't he? Was he federal?
That I don't remember.
Okay.
It could have been.
Okay. I
know he and Pierre DuPont were good buddies, you know, at one point in his career. And like I said before, Jackie Robinson, they worked together on a number of projects. And, you know, they got really close. His wife, Jackie's wife, was very close to his wife as well.
So he was about as good a role model as a young man can have growing up, saying, okay, well, here's this guy in my life and my family who's accomplished all this. And what you chose as a career wasn't totally a shock on the heels of all that he accomplished in the field he was in.
Right. At one point, there were three of us working in higher education. There was Owen, there was myself, and my Uncle Fred, who taught at Howard. He was a dentist initially.
Howard's one of the most prominent black universities in the world.
And he went back and got training in histopathology. So he became a tissue guy. Right. And did that until he passed away and retired.
Now, what about Robert and his?
Yes. I got to make a tribute here. Fran Smith. She was instrumental into looking at his death.
Fran's a local woman who is very prominent in keeping, actually, she's been one of the prominent people in getting our Black Experience program going. And her son Ray has been active helping us out. So she's still working on that.
Yes. As a matter of fact, they mentioned your name. I saw it a few weeks ago. But, she was very instrumental in trying to get my uncle Robert, everybody called him Dick Peagler, Congressional Medal of Honor. And he was killed in combat, and he was killed by a sniper. And,
where was the service? I know, but if you could explain where he was and
where he was killed. Yeah, it was the island of Lee. And what's really interesting, my Uncle Bill was also a combat veteran. And it just so happened that both of them met in Hawaii at the same time. And my Uncle Bill was the last one to see him. And and once this hit the surface, started to do some investigating. And it was President Clinton that really started delving into this whole thing with African Americans and the combat contribution and patriotism and all of that. And you and I talked about this. There was a Time magazine that came out with all the people that they considered to be worthy of the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Were you aware of that at all when you were a boy?
Not at all.
Living in Milford?
Not at all.
So you just had this deceased
That's correct.
person who was in your family and had died young.
That's correct. And
but he had saved. Explain, if you can, briefly, what he did to deserve recognition.
Well, he was in combat. And this is from what I understand. And his platoon was pinned down. I think he was a second lieutenant. And any good leader, when you pin down like that, I mean, just going through military training myself, you have to have a leader to get yourself positioned and get your troops down, get your guns ready, all of those kinds of things. And apparently he was running around doing that, trying to get his men into position, and getting the machine guns up and, and those kinds of things. And sniper killer. And, certainly worthy of recognition. He got the Distinguished Service Cross, which was the second below the Congressional Medal of Honor. But Clinton, in going through things, apparently in the top 10, he was on that list. But they only chose 7. And then that's when Fran said, doggone it, this guy's from the Milford.
So he was one of the few who was on Clinton's list who didn't get the Congressional Medal.
But when I read what some of these individuals did to get the Congressional Medal of Honor, as bold and aggressive, as he was in combat, there were some people that did some things that. Yeah,
there's no question about that. Yeah. But it's still someone to be extremely proud of, and in fact, he proved himself a leader.
Exactly.
And made the sacrifice.
Exactly.
What perspectives can you share on your time as a teen in New Milford? You did already the fact when you were, I don't know how old you were when you asked the girl out in New Milford.
I can tell you, I was 17.
Okay. Then you've actually covered some of that. But what was it like for you to be competing in sports in New Milford? Be competing in sports for New Milford as a baseball player, as a basketball player. There certainly were a fair number of black kids that you would have gotten to know playing in some of the other schools and things like that.
Really?
Well, Tech always had black athletes.
Tech?
Yeah.
Who else?
Tech. You didn't play Danbury, so I guess it was probably
it was Henry Tech.
Okay.
And that was true for baseball. That was true. As a matter of fact, Art had that conversation, and he said the same thing. You certainly experienced some other black students at Henry Tech, and that was true. And I got to know some of those guys just from hanging out in Danbury.
Yeah.
But that's so true. And when I think back of it, I never saw a black baseball player. I never saw another black basketball player other than playing against Henry Tech.
What about on your own team, in your own school, being a black athlete? How did you interact? How did your teammates interact with you? How did coaches interact with you? Did you ever have any kind of issues that you perceived as being because you were black?
As a matter of fact, I wouldn't have any evidence to produce something like that.
That's good.
Yeah, or even think
it's a good thing.
But I was disappointed at times, thinking that there were some people that made the varsity team, and when I was a sophomore, and I know that I can beat a one-on-one. Yeah, I knew that because I played against them. But other than that, I guess that was probably my fault, because they had the selection was, okay, those who were going to go out for varsity and those who were going to go out for JV. So, a number of guys that were sophomores like me said, okay, JV, we'll go out for the JV team. And being that we had the coach that we did, we played JV ball. And some of us, I think, should have been.
So more or less than you're related to sports in high school, mostly the issues that you might have had were issues that were typical of sophomores who had enough athletic ability they think they should be varsity, whether they could have been or not.
Right.
Not related to being black.
No, not related to that.
How might growing up in New Milford have shaped your views of black life in the state, in the United States, and elsewhere? In other words, that's pretty self-explanatory, I guess. How aware were you of the level of racism in New Milford, in Connecticut, and throughout the United States while you were living here? Was it something you talked about at home?
Oh, absolutely. And my dad, he was not a friend of the South, and all that was going on during that period that we're talking about with all the civil rights movement,
right?
Martin Luther King, and all of the activists at that particular point. He could not stand the South. Okay, but the thing he forgot, and this was a trigger for him. He was an auxiliary police officer, So if the town police needed manpower, he would be one of the guys that would dress up in a uniform, auxiliary police, hat, 38 special, all of that.
Yep.
And one night somebody came by, he was directing traffic, and somebody called him a nigger. He was incensed, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know why. I've been called that, before. But I think it was the idea of, here he is, trying to be of help to the community, and somebody is audacious enough to call him a nigger. And he was incensed. And, getting back to the South, he just didn't want to go visit there.
Rich, excuse me. He had an issue with how things were being handled regarding civil rights in the South, or did he have an issue with blacks protesting and going for rights?
No, it was the racism.
The segregation.
That's right. Exactly.
Jim Crow, the whole.
Exactly.
Gamut.
Exactly. And I went to Virginia when I was 10 years old. And that was my first experience with colored bathrooms, white bathrooms. As a matter of fact, my Uncle Fred and my cousin Butch, we would go by his office and be out there playing catch. And the ball went across the street. And even Butch at that time, he's a couple years younger than me, he said, Richard can't go over there. I said, what? The ball's across the street, I can't go over there? I said, the heck with that. I went over there, grabbed the ball and ran back over to the other side of the street. But that gave me an idea of what my dad was talking about.
And also, to keep it related to New Milford,
yes,
how New Milford, not that it was wonderful, but New Milford or this area was so much better than it was certainly in the South.
Absolutely.
And even around, I'm sure, like in Boston or certain parts of New York or whatever.
Exactly. But I think the trigger for my dad being called a nigger, that smacked him across the face. It smacked him across the face. And I haven't seen the man ever that angry.
Well, I think it is a reflection of when I asked about how much racism there was around here or in Connecticut. There still is a lot of racism here 50 years later, 55 years later, and we need to be aware of that and can always work on it. But the fact that it was something which you were not aware of very much at that point until that happened to your father.
Yeah. Well, and
then when you
that
went to
experience
Virginia.
in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was another grounding experience for me.
You mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. When you were in school, when you were in high school, did you learn anything in school about Black history other than the fact that we had slavery and the fact that there was, around here you might have heard that we had underground railroad stops and things like that? Was there anything taught about Black history at all?
I remember in the history book, George Washington Carver and the Peanuts. That was pretty much
The
it.
stereotypes, yeah.
Yep.
How much awareness did you have in '63, the civil rights legislation, and all the different things that happened immediately after that, riots in the city? I mean, you left in Milford by pretty much, other than coming to visit your mom and your family, whatever, you had pretty much left by the mid-'60s, but Medgar Evers, John Lewis, people like that. Lewis probably wasn't unless you really hadn't followed the news, you wouldn't have been aware of him as much until much later. But Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and people like that, how much awareness did you have of people like that living in New Milford?
Yeah. Not much. A lot of that stuff I learned when I was in college, and being at a predominantly Black institution. And, those topics and those things would pop up all the time in discussions.
Why did you, when you were in New Milford High School and you were content for the most part, you had a good experience here for the most part, why did you choose to go to a mostly Black school rather than go to UConn or go to,
You really want to hear this story?
Sports? I don't know. I, as a good journalist, I should know what the answer is going to be, but in this case, I don't have a clue.
My Uncle Fred was a dentist. He went to Wilberforce University. There was a school that was founded by the abolitionist William Wilberforce. Okay, school for Black people down in Wilberforce, Ohio. I was not going to college. I knew my parents couldn't afford to send me. And so I had a guy come by and interview me from an airline. And I think it was United. He had flown here and he was recruiting people. And he came to the house and interviewed me, and he was talking about communications and ticket agent and all the other things that help flight and airlines. And we talked, and he looked over my record in high school, and he said, I want you to realize, one other aspect that you might want to consider for I'm offering you a job. What you consider is that your parents can fly any place where there's United Airlines, any place across the country for free. My mother, once she lit up,
that's a nice intention.
Exactly. And I was thinking that's the direction I was headed until my uncle told me about Wilberforce University. And he said, I want you to just submit an application. What do you have? So I went to Mr. Newman, who was a guidance counselor, and I said, can you find a college catalog on Wilberforce University? So in about 2 weeks, he got it back.
The people need to remember this is way before the internet, before Al Gore invented the internet. There was no way, and sometimes to get information on something.
Right. But he sent away and got it for me. And I saw Central State University, Wilberforce, Ohio. I said, this is great. Had the application, filled it out, sent it back in. Got accepted. So then I called my Uncle Fred. I said, Uncle Fred, I got accepted at Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. He said, what? That's not Wilberforce University. He said, you big dummy. I had to laugh myself.
You got into the wrong school.
I got into the wrong school, and what a blessing. Wilberforce University was a quarter mile down the street.
Yeah.
So the two universities were always at odds in basketball. Great competition. But I was just honored.
The forks in the road.
Yeah, just one of those things, and just made some great people. And it's just a wonderful 4-year experience.
While you were, when you came home summers, whatever, while you were still a college student and you were in New Milford for the most part, you were based here, I'm guessing, until you were out of high school. Is that right?
That's
out of college.
Yes.
Okay. So, what was it like for you to come home, interacting with friends and everything, when you'd been at a school that was all black, or was it all black?
Probably about 95%.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, it was just like business as usual, you know.
You had a comfort zone here.
Yeah, exactly. And the comfort zone there, and
good for you.
Yeah, it's just a great experience.
Let me ask kind of a broad question. Not that these have all been precise, but through the perspective of the many years since leaving New Milford, how did growing up in New Milford either help or hinder your growth as an adult, personally and professionally? In other words, were there things about growing up in New Milford that might have...
Absolutely helpful. There's no question about it. You know, I'm going into an environment and working with college kids that have a multitude of issues every day. And I was the only black counselor in the counseling center. Okay. And they didn't make any distinction. You know, like I said, the diversity was small back then. And, you know, so probably 95% of the young people I saw were Caucasian students. And my relationships that I built in the interaction, you know, I hate to say this, but, you know, some of my cousins in Detroit were probably criminals, okay? But I used to hang out with them. I wouldn't ride with them in different places, but, you know, so, but I enjoy people's company as long as you're not going to do something that's going to harm me personally or whatever. So it was just like business as usual. They would look at me, we would sit down, you know, I'd start taking my case notes and, you know, and that kind of thing. And I'd ask questions and act kind of stupid. And they'd say, this guy's okay, you know. And that experience with them came from New Milford and the relationship building that I did here. It was like business as usual, you know. And at that particular time, because the diversity was low, I didn't see that many black kids until I became advisor for the Black Student Union. And then they got to know me because most of my work was behind doors. So, and then I started, you know, doing some writing on race relations and, you know, and that kind of stuff. That was my battle, training people.
Well, your growth as a person in New Milford, you know, from hating it as a little boy.
That's exactly.
Being scared, being like abandoned out in the woods or whatever, to being a very prominent, successful high school student. You know, said, as I've said a couple of times, as a tribute to you, but also as a nice tribute to New Milford. That it afforded you the opportunities.
Exactly.
To use what you already had as a person.
You know, I mean, how was it defined? Yeah, you know, the people that I met in Milford and were good friends, most of them were white. So what am I going to do? Go to a black community and say that's not part of my life anymore? That's not me.
Do you have other thoughts you want to, what directions we haven't gone? We've gone in a lot of different directions, and you've been incredibly thoughtful and revealing, which we really appreciate. Are there other things you want to bring up that you'd like to mention? By the way, I should mention, and I did mention her name briefly, Rich's mom, Oral Peagler Robinson, is still kicking at 93, and he and Vashti come here for 3.5 hour drive. Is that right?
Yeah, 3.5.
From just south of Syracuse, Cortland, New York, to visit her weekly. Every couple of weeks, they make the long drive, and if nothing else, it says a lot. Well, it says a lot, but it says a lot about the family ties. The Peagler family ties are still strong, and so we're incredibly proud to have you as part of our oral history program, and just want to give you. Do you have any other things you want to mention, or?
You know, not really. You know, I can tell story after story after story, but I don't want to bore you guys.
I don't think you're gonna bore anybody. He was just pointing his what Vashti is sitting over here.
She's laughing,
wondering how long Rich is gonna go on. So
no.
but it's wonderful. absolutely wonderful. And, you know, being a personal friend of yours has made it that much more gratifying to me. So want to thank you, and we appreciate having you here.
I'm an emotional guy, as you can see.
That's very much a part of what you mentioned all the way along. Why you were able to use what you got into Milford and transfer that into your career in counseling and helping other people.
Honored to be back here.
We're honored to have you here. And we hope you'll be back in the museum very soon.
I will do what I can to be back.
I know it's not easy when you're here to see your mom, but we would love to see you here again.
I will make it a point.
Good. Thank you, Richie.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.